Do I need to rethink my I almost said grading system. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my favorite books from 2024. So I usually end the year talking about the books that I love from the year, but we're actually mixing things up. Also to get my stuff together, and we're doing this as the first video from 2025. So happy new year, friends. I hope you guys are having a good start to the new year. I'm realizing this is going to come out on the 1st, so it really wouldn't have been long yet, but I hope your new year is off to a fantastic start. And today, we're talking about my favorite books from 2024. So I do have a list of 10, and they are in somewhat of an order. So I'm going to go from 10 to 1, ending the video with my very favorite, but it's a little all over the place. My reading in 2024 was very interesting because I went through and I made a list of all of my 5 stars, and I was making my list of my favorites, and I was realizing that I wouldn't consider some of my 5 stars my favorites from the year. So I broadened it to some of my 4 to 4.5, and there's definitely a couple of 4 to 4.5 stars that are higher on this list than some of my 5 stars are. So do I need to rethink my I almost said grading system, my rating system? Maybe, but it's just kind of all over the place. So there is somewhat of an order, but just consider these my favorites in general. Starting at number 10, it's actually one that I read in December, so you guys probably won't have seen anything about this quite yet, and that is Ruthless Vows. And this is the sequel to Divine Rivals. It ends the duology, and I picked this up at the perfect time. So this series follows our 2 main characters, Iris and Roman, and they are both reporters that are vying for the same position at a newspaper. It's kind of set, it's not like a specific time period because it is a little bit of a fantasy story, but it gives me the vibes of like a World War II setting. And there's this magical war going on between 2 gods, and they are reporting on it, and so they end up both going to the front line. It's marketed as kind of like a rivals to lovers situation. It is a little bit of an enemies to lovers, but rivals, I feel like it's an exaggeration. Also, if you're going into this series thinking it's going to be super fantastical, don't. This is a great book for people who are love historical fiction in general and want to try out fantasy for the first time, because this is very, very heavily historical fiction with a little bit of fantasy. The sequel has way more fantasy than the first one, I would say, but they both have very minimal fantasy elements. Either way, I really enjoyed the first one, but I had put a lot of time between the first and second one. I was very nervous about going into this one, but something about the cover told me cold, I think, which is because the cover was white, or a version of this cover is white. And I was like, I need to pick this up. I need to pick this up now. So I picked it up when I was in the mood for it, and that worked so well, because I ended up giving it 5 stars. Is it the best thing I've ever read in my entire life? No, but it was very good, which is why it kind of comes in at number 10, because while I really enjoyed it, and I think, again, picking it up at the right time is kind of why I enjoyed it so much, it's definitely not my favorite of all time. It's not my favorite of the year. It was just a really good reading experience, and I fell back in love with the characters. I fell back in love with the romance of everything. The chemistry between our main 2 characters was fantastic. Even though I remembered a lot from the first book, I kind of fell in love with all these characters again, and it was just a lot of fun to dive back in. And I was really happy with the fact that usually what happens when I put too much time between books is I love the first one, and then I put way too much time between the first and the second, and then the second one is just kind of meh. And I was very worried that's what was going to happen, and that is not what happened. I ended up loving it. So again, right time, read it at the right time. I think that's why I loved it so much. But it was a very good sequel as far as sequels goes. I think if you can read them back to back, that's probably the best option. And I liked it. If you like the first one, I think you're going to enjoy the second one. The next one, coming in at number 9, is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This is a contemporary romance that I had picked up just because it was, I think I read this in August sometime. So it was near the end of summer, and I was starting to get into the fall mood, but I wasn't quite there yet, and so I wanted to pick up something that was still in the summer vibe. And this felt perfect. I picked it up from Book of the Month. This was the, what was this? This was the April Book of the Month. So I picked it up a few months later, but I ended up loving this one. I've never read anything by this author, so I didn't really know what I was getting into. This is actually the third in a series, but it's a companion series. So while I've had some people tell me before I went into this one that it was fine to go in, and then I also had some people tell me that I should have read the first book, which is Part of Your World, first. I think, knowing what I know now, I'm really glad I hadn't read the first book going into this one, because there was some stuff that happened in the first book and some characters that we met in the first book that were more of a side character-ish situation that became significantly more of a main character in this book. And a lot of some of the plot things that might not have been surprises to people who had read the first book were surprises to me, and I liked that. So maybe controversial. I'm glad I read the third in the series before the first in the series, but I still want to read the rest. This book, we follow our main two characters, Emma and Justin, and they meet on Reddit. Well, Justin puts this thing out on Reddit, and Emma goes, I relate to that, and so they kind of have a conversation and start a deal, basically. What happens is both of them date people, and then the person that they date finds their one true love right afterwards. So they both kind of think that they are cursed. So what they've decided to do is date each other for one summer. Emma's a travel nurse, so she and her friend travel and find a job near where he lives, and they date for the entire summer. There's some stipulations and some guidelines and stuff that go along with it, but they basically date for the summer in the hopes that they will kick this curse to the curb and they will find their one true love next. There's a lot more to that. Emma has a lot of traumatic, let's say, growing up. She kind of like grew up a little bit in the foster care system. Her mom was there and wasn't there, and always just comes around and is very, very flighty. Whereas his mother ended up embezzling, and so she's about to go to jail, and he's about to become the guardian of his siblings, I believe. And they create this deal at that time. And of course, it's more than that. They kind of create a much deeper relationship. But I liked all of these different elements. I liked how they had very different, like vastly different ways that they grew up, but they still have traumatic might not be the right word, but they still have like PTSD from their respective familial parent situations. And they can look at a situation very differently because of that. And I think that because of their different life experiences, they work really well together. And you've got Emma, who's just, very flighty because her mom has been very flighty. So she doesn't ever like really hunker down in relationships. And so it's nice to see her actually like care about someone. I don't know. It was very good. It had a lot of the feels. I went in not expecting a whole lot. Not because I didn't expect this to be good, just because I didn't know what to expect, and it ended up being amazing. So yes, this one comes in at number 9. Coming in at number 8 is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, and this is the first in a trilogy. I did a whole video. I've talked about this quite a lot recently, so I'll leave it linked above if you'd like to see all of my thoughts on the series as a whole. I did like a spoilery vlog on the whole thing, but it's a YA thriller, and I went in after reading a bunch of thrillers this summer. I was in a very thriller mood this summer, and I had read some YA thrillers where they just didn't work, and some of the adult thrillers did work for me, so I was a little hesitant going in because of that. But it's one that I'd heard a lot of good things about. I'd heard, like, my best friend really liked this series, and so, like, she has really good taste, so obviously I was, like, gonna trust that. And so I don't know, like, I just kind of went in not sure what to expect, but I'd been burned like in the past few months. But I was like, I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna read the entire trilogy and I'm gonna try it out. And by the time I was like a good chunk of the way into this book, I knew this was gonna be a favorite. Like, I loved this book. It's definitely my favorite in the series, which is why this is on this list instead of the entire series or a different book in the series. The first 2 got 5. The third one I think got 4.5. But I loved the story. I loved that, yes, it's a mystery thriller, but it's significantly more of a mystery because you are solving this mystery with our main characters, Pip and Ravi. so I'm sure many people know what this series is about, but it basically takes place in this town where this girl was murdered 5 years before the story takes place. And it is supposed to be, it was concluded that she was murdered by her boyfriend, who then committed suicide before anything could happen. And that's how people found out, is he kind of like left this note on his phone. And it's been 5 years, and Pip does not, it feels wrong to her. Like, she knew this boy growing up, he was friends with her best friend's older sister, and he was just always really nice to her, and she goes, something just doesn't click. And so she has this big project that they all do when they're juniors, and she decides to investigate herself a little bit. She doesn't under this disguise is maybe not the right word, but she basically says it's like to investigate how media played a part in solving this crime. And so it turns into actually her solving this crime, and she ends up teaming up with Robbie, who is the brother of the guy who died or committed suicide. And so it's the two of them solving this murder. And I really liked it. It's a mixed media book. If you like those different elements, it's like she records all of her interviews, so you have like that, you have pictures, you have emails and things like that. And if you listen to the audiobook, which I highly recommend, it's full cast recording, it's got all this fun extra elements to it. And then it continues with the rest of the series, because like it kind of gets turned into a podcast. So in the second book we have a lot of podcast elements and things like that. So I just really liked it. I liked the mixed media elements of it. I liked the audiobook for it. I liked our characters. Pip was very strong-willed, and what I liked about it is, like, minus one thing in the last book, her character didn't really change, not in a bad way, not like there wasn't any character development, because there was, but like in series it's really easy to see a character just kind of like change personalities a little bit, and that didn't happen here. So I really enjoyed my time reading this one. The next one is actually a novella, and that is Stuck With You by Allie Hazelwood. This is part of her 3 STEM novellas, but she writes a lot of STEM romances, and so this was just, I think, the second or third in her novellas series. And I say that because like it's just the 3 best friends talking to each other, like that's the connection between these 3. Anyway, this one is a forced proximity situation. I can't remember any of the character names, of course, but our main female lead, she ends up getting stuck in an elevator with a guy that she has a really big crush on. She went on a date with, and then found out some information about him and kind of ghosted him, and he can't figure out why. And so they're stuck in this elevator, and she's kind of like reliving the date, how they met, the date, and the information that she has learned about him. And it switches back and forth timeline-wise, but I really enjoyed just the elements of it. I really enjoyed the characters. There was just, the chemistry was perfect. So I just really enjoyed it. Like, as far as novellas go, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel, because sometimes novellas work and sometimes novellas don't work. But this one worked really well. Also, this author, I don't think I've given anything this author has written less than maybe a 4.5. Everything's been mainly a 5-star. So the chemistry was beautiful, and I just loved the story and the creation, and the fact that it was a novella and I still have these strong feelings about it, I think says a lot. All right, so the next one is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. I have very strong opinions and love for this book. I love the idea of giving characters in Pride and Prejudice backstories, especially characters like Mary, who's the middle sister, who was given like 0 anything in the story. But I've also read some retellings or reimaginings of her story that sucked a lot and were basically like just terrible fan fiction. So I'd heard really good things. Actually, one of you lovely people, Elizabeth, gifted this to me probably like 3 years ago, but I finally read it, and oh my goodness, you were correct. This was so good. This is honestly one of the best reimaginings of the character of Mary that I think I've ever read, because not only did they really stick with her character, they gave her a backstory as to why she was doing the things that she was doing, and then they continued with her story and gave her a happily ever after that felt correct for her character. Like, I know she wasn't given a lot in the books, but she was given enough. And in some of the past retellings, like I read one where they basically like and made her end up with Darcy, which feels so wrong on so many levels, and I just don't understand the thought process there. But anyway, this one felt more realistic. The writing was really, really good. I loved the character development. Like, just her whole story was perfection from beginning to end. So if you are a Jane Austen fan and you like the idea of learning more about these characters, this is a really good reimagining of the character of Mary. And this is probably one of my favorite books that I own that is a reimagining or remix or based on something Jane Austen-esque. And I have a lot. I have quite a few retellings and reimaginings and things of that nature that are based on Jane Austen books or Jane Austen characters, and this is definitely by far my favorite that I have read. So, high praise, but this is sitting on, what did I say, spot number 6 or 7 or something like that? 6. So, like, I just think very highly of this book. The next one, coming in at number 5, is Heartless Hunter by Kristen Cicerelli. I've talked about this a lot here recently. This is a witch versus witch hunter situation. The world building is very fascinating. We also have this extra element of not only is she a witch in a world where like witches are thought of as very, very bad, she is also a little bit of a vigilante where she's trying to save witches. So our main two characters basically end up trying to make the other one fall for them, and then they both end up doing it. So Rune, our main character, is a witch, and like I said, she's a little bit of this vigilante known as the Crimson Moth, and only like 2 people know who she actually is. And then she's got this guy, on the other hand, named Gideon, who is the head of the guard, who's like their main job is like finding witches. And so she's trying to find the location of this witch to like save her, and she thinks that Gideon would probably have that information. And Gideon has been given some information, and he thinks that there's a chance she could be this Crimson Moth person, and so they're trying to flirt with the other one so that they can get the information that they want. There's a lot of other books that have this dynamic, a lot of books that I've read that have this dynamic, but I've never read a book that has the chemistry that they have so beautifully. Like, I've heard people who usually don't like books that have this dynamic, that have these characters, things that are very, very similar plot-wise, that loved this book. So I feel like that says a lot, and I cannot wait for the sequel because I have thoughts about how this one ended. But I went in thinking I was probably going to enjoy it, but not knowing a whole lot about it. The hype kind of got to me, which is why I picked it up. And it was beautiful, and I loved it. And that's why it's sitting at number 5. It's not my favorite book of the year, but it's definitely up there. And I am patiently, is probably not the right word, but patiently waiting for the second one. I want to reread this, honestly. Like, that's how much I love this, that I'm willing to reread it, which I think says a lot. The next one that I loved, coming in at number 4, is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is a mystery thriller that just had me guessing the entire time. And the reason I think I was so surprised and why it's so high on this list is that every single person in this book is an unreliable narrator, and I don't like those. I usually do not enjoy books where the narrator is unreliable, but it worked so well. So it follows our 2 main characters, and it switches back and forth between their perspectives. It's Alex and Josie, and they bump into each other because they bump into each other in a bar and realize that they have the same birthday. And so they're like, oh, birthday twins. And I think it's Alex has podcasts, and Josie comes up to her and thinks that she might be an interesting subject for one of Alex's podcasts. And she usually does things on like women. And so it's the 2 of them having a lot of conversations. There's mixed media elements, so if you can do the audiobook, I recommend that because you've got elements like this. You probably can't see it, but like that's a news article right there, and then you've got obviously transcripts from when they were recording these podcasts. And every time you sit there and you go, oh, so-and-so lied, and then you start to believe a different character, something comes up that makes you question whether or not that person is telling the truth. And I'm not even kidding you. Until the very last page, it had me guessing, because like you come to the end, you come to the conclusion, the book has given you the things that you need to know, and then there's an epilogue that throws everything that you thought you know into question, yet again. And I don't know if that's just her writing, because I've never read anything by Lisa Jewell, or if that's just the way that she wrote this book, but I loved it. This is definitely for people who like mysteries and thriller vibes, but want things, who are like me, that are scaredy cats and don't want like the scary elements of thrillers, because while this definitely had its moments, and like there was definitely some scenes at the end of this book that I was like, that's a bit much, I was able to read the majority of this book in bed before going to sleep. This is definitely on the more chill side of thrillers, but it literally, like I'm telling you, it had me guessing the entire time. And it's just like something about this. I said, I need to pick this up. I don't know why, but I just need to pick this up. And I listened to myself and I did it. And oh my goodness, was it good. All right, coming in at number 3 is Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is again another read at the right time situation. I love Emily Henry's books. I've loved all of her books, even though like some of them I definitely loved more than others. There's some 5 stars, there's some 4 stars. But I had a friend who read this book and was like, this is by far her best book. And I was like, oh, that's a bold claim. And then I read this at the right time, and it's definitely my favorite book that she has written so far. I have not read her most recent one, I will say that. But at the time, it's my favorite one. And it's about this group of 6 people who have become friends, and 3 of them met in college, and it's some of their significant others, and they go take a summer vacation every summer, and this just happens to be the last time they're going to be able to vacation in the house that they have been vacationing in, because the house is going for sale. Our main character, who we follow, Harriet, and her ex, Wynn, they were engaged and they broke up, and no one else in the group knows this, so they are kind of forced to pretend to still be dating, just to kind of make, it's the last year, they want to make everything easier for everybody else, so they do that. And so there's a lot of elements in here about growing older and having the same friends, and like, so people are getting married, and so people are having kids, and all of these different elements. And it just kind of really resonated, because like we have a group of 6 people that like we met in college that we still talk to all the time. I read this right before, like a month or 2 before I gave birth to Peanut, and so I was in that brain of like, things are changing in the group, and oh my goodness, and this just was like the right book at the right time. Plus the chemistry between our main 2 characters, Harriet and Wynn, amazing. This is a second chance romance, which I usually steer clear from. I just haven't really enjoyed that trope, and it worked so well in this one, and I don't understand why, but it did, and I'm not gonna question it. So my favorite Emily Henry book, not only did it hit me at the right time and was reflective of some of the stuff going on in my personal life, I also think this is the best romance, chemistry-wise. Just like, I really liked it, which is why it's number 3. Coming in at number 2 is a shock to me. I mean, it's not now that I've read it and thought about it, but like before going into it, it would be a shock, and that is The Measure. I read this in January, February, sometime in there. And it's a like speculative sci-fi that is a genre that I have now discovered is one that I enjoy. Who would have thunk it? But at the time I was like, nothing about this book sounds interesting. It follows this world where one day everybody wakes up with a box outside their door, and in the box is a string, and depending on how they discover that, depending on how long the string is how long you have to live. So it's like the string tells your life. And so you've got some people who have really long strings, you have some people who have really short strings, you have some people who didn't even want to know the length of their string, so they didn't open their box and they're living their life normally. And so it's just what happens to society when you've been given this information. And I just really liked it. I don't know why. Like, the writing in this book shouldn't have worked for me, because it was like 3rd person, and it was written almost biographical. Like, you followed like, I think it was 5 or 6 different perspectives, and it was very like scientific. It felt like a nonfiction book, really, is what it did. And so as I'm getting into it, I'm like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. And then the writing turned out to be like one of my favorite parts of this book because of that. Like, it was written so scientifically and straightforward, and like I still ended up caring about all these characters, and because of that, it lended this air of like realism to the story. So while I don't think we're all going to wake up tomorrow with boxes on our front step to tell us how long we're going to live. That's a little far-fetched. I believed that this could happen. Like, it was just close enough to reality that I was like, maybe. And so the fact that the writing could do that, amazing. And now I want to read more things like this. Like, I've read another book by John Mars called The One because of this. I read a book called The Dreamers that had it's the same kind of vibe where it's like set in our society, but there's just a little something that's different that couldn't actually happen. And then like what happens to society because of that. And it's made me rethink some of my interests in books. Like it's opened this brand new subgenre that I didn't know I was going to enjoy. So if you have anything, suggestions like that, let me know. But yeah, and the fact that, like I said, I read this in like January or February, and I'm still thinking about it, and I'm still talking about it. Like, a lot of my like favorite books tend to come from the second half of the year, just because like that's what's fresh in my mind and what I remember loving. And it's been almost a full year, and I'm still talking about how much I love this book. So I feel like that says a lot about it. And then coming at number 1 is a sequel. And does anybody have a guess as to what it could be? Because I've read about this since I've read it. And that is Never a Hero by Vanessa Lynn, which is the sequel to Only a Monster. This is a trilogy. The third one's coming out next year, and I am so excited. But this book came out, I think, about a year ago. And that's probably about a year after the first one came out. And I was, again, very worried because like I like to, when I leave space between books and series, I'm really good at forgetting things. And I was so worried because I loved the first one so much and the world was so creative. But I think I was at the right time again, because like this is one of these series that I just love the world so much, because this one, fantastic. The first book, I've read about this so much. I'm sure you're tired of hearing about this. But the first book follows our main character, Joan, and it's set in this world. Just kind of, I mean, it's our world, but it's set in London, and she's visiting her mom's family. Her mom passed away when they were really young, so she's visiting her mom's side of the family, and she's working at this house, and she has this boy that she's got a crush on, and they're just possibly starting to date, and then circumstances come up and she discovers that she is part monster from her mom's side of the family. And what that means is there are people who have the ability to time travel, but to do so they steal days, minutes, weeks, years, whatever, off of humans to do it. They need to time travel a week in the future. They steal a week from one person to people, whatever it is. And then based on your family, you have an extra power. And so she has discovered that she has this ability to time travel. And then it turns out this guy that she really likes is actually a monster hunter. And so she and her cousin and a guy from a rival family end up kind of going on the run from said guy. And if you liked the story but are satisfied with it, the first book has an ending. There's an epilogue that could like possibly question it, but there's an end. And then this book obviously takes that end and kind of like twists it, and things happen, and there was definitely a cliffhanger at the end of this book. But what I liked about this is that because the thing that happened, this is very hard to talk about, the thing that happened at the end of the first book, that I cannot tell you because it's a huge spoiler, but sets up in this story, there's a few things you could do with that, and I was afraid that the author was going to take the kind of cop-out way, and then she threw a different option at us, and I was not prepared for it. So not only was the story set in a world and set in a magic system that I loved and I thought was super creative, she took these tropes and these situations that there are very obvious and overused things that she could just go with. It's a YA book. If you use those things, that's fine. I mean, it's clearly worked for a bunch of other different YA books, and those are very popular. So I wouldn't have thought less of her for doing that. But she said, hold on, I'm actually going to do this instead, and did things very different. I loved it. I loved it. I will never stop raving about this. This is definitely one of those series that like I did not expect anything from. I picked up the first book because I got it in like a fairy loot, I think, and I picked it up because I needed it for a magical readathon prompt. I don't remember what it was, but it was like something I couldn't find on any other books, and I just picked it up just because, and then it became amazing. This is by far my favorite book of the year because I went in worried that I wasn't going to enjoy my time because I put too much time between it, and that was not a problem. I loved it. Everything was fantastic. And 5 out of 5 stars. So I'm gonna stop raving about this because I feel like I talk about this book all the time, but this is my favorite book. I mean, I just can't stop thinking about it. And that's it. Here's our look at my top 10 books from 2024. I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, please let me know all your thoughts on any of the books that I mentioned in today's video, or what some of your favorite books from the past year were. If you can narrow it down, give me a handful. I would love to know. I won't make you pick one because that's just me. All as readers know we can't just pick one. So if you have a few, let me know some of your favorites. And then those might get added to my TBR. Who knows? I have a never-ending TBR. We all do. But let me know. I'd love to know some of the things that you just love from last year. But otherwise, I think that's it for today. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. And if you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links. So go check all that out. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.